So I'm delighted to be here moderating this panel, How Do We Make Impact Investing Work for Women? And I'm really delighted to be joined here on the panel with Eva Terberger, the Head of Evaluation at KfW, Ise Bosch, CEO and founder of Dreilinden, which is an impact investor, Susan Markham, Senior Coordinator of Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment at USAID, and Ritva Laukkanen, the Chairman of the Board of Finnfund and a long-term employee of IFC prior to that. So I'm really delighted to turn the conversation now to talk a little bit about investing and investing in women. And I want to steal an idea from our last moderator, which I quite liked. Audrey had asked the audience to give a show of hands, and I'd like to do the same so we get a sense of who's in the audience, but who in the audience and on stage would identify themselves as an impact investor? Well, it's, I don't know, maybe 25%, something like that. And then the other question I had is who in the audience would say they are an investment target for an impact investor? I'm going to go ahead and raise my hand. Okay, so, and then I would invite all of you with your perspectives to send questions to the panelists as well. And I understand our question app is working again, so I will, of course, ask the panel to give you their views, but we'd be really happy to take questions from the audience later as well. The first thing I'd like to say to frame our conversation this afternoon is that we have seen a lot of data that shows that a focus on women actually correlates to outperformance financially. For example, in a recent Credit Suisse report that was published earlier this year, they actually determined that companies with more than 15% of women in top management had, on average, a 5% higher ROE than companies where women represent less than 10% of management. So certainly as an investor, 5% is not an insignificant difference. Similarly, they found a 5% higher stock market valuation on average for companies with at least one woman on the board over those who had no women on the board. So these are statistically significant differences that they found. Women's World Banking has done research as well, talking about the inclusive finance sector, and we know from our own research that any inclusive finance institution that has 68% or more women, as clients grow 40% faster on average than their counterparts that have less than 68%. That group also has a 4% lower portfolio at risk on average, also pretty significant, and a 2.5% higher return on asset. So these are pretty compelling statistics, and let's just, I mean, I could add a few more, but let's just assume for a minute that women or gender diverse organizations do outperform financially. Then my question is, why is Women's World Banking Capital Partners, or the PE fund that I have the honor of managing, the only investor in microfinance or inclusive finance today with a specific gender focus? Shouldn't everyone have a gender focus if this is true? And so I'd like to ask my panelists about this. And I'll start with Eva. And I want to pose the question to you, Eva. Has the investing public not embraced the idea, or do they not believe that women-focused institutions outperform? And if not, why not? Or are there other factors at work?
I mean, first of all, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot as well for being invited to this really exciting event and being able to speak on this panel as well. First of all, I would like to refer to Audrey's question in the last session again, and I must say, I was really impressed how many people know the numbers. All these hands going up, they were all convinced, and I would say, you've come far already. As you see, I'm pretty old already, and I remember very well, about 25 years ago, sitting in a big conference on microfinance. And we were trying to get the message over that microfinance is a real business. You can make it cost-covering and even earn a profit. And there was this man, of course, sitting on the panel. He came from a big German bank, and he was saying, yeah, I'm so convinced of microfinance. We do this in our corporate social responsibility department, and we do that in our corporate social responsibility department. And we were sitting in the back and saying, oh God, no, he's saying the wrong thing. We want to make the case that it's a business. So I would say you've come much further, at least in this room. However, even if I believe all these numbers, and I raised my hand as well when you asked, do you believe in it being a financial case? Even if I raised my hand there, I still would say these are numbers where you compare businesses without women, with those with women, and then you say, okay, they've got a higher, on average, of course, a higher, but that financial return, that does not mean that there are just as many businesses with women than with men. Otherwise, most of you wouldn't be sitting here. Which means the pool of good investments where the people are just as qualified as in a business with only male owners. The pool of these female businesses, I will call them, of equal quality is much smaller than that of men. And that's why I want to put out the provoking hypothesis, which I hope you can convince me of the opposite, that perhaps it's not the question of too little money being there, but perhaps of too little good investments, even if women are good investments.
Thank you, Eva. That is a provocative question, thought-provoking question. And I'd like to turn to Susan from USAID to address maybe quickly the original question. Does the investment public not believe the theory that women, gender-diverse organizations outperform? And if not, why not? And then perhaps address what Eva has suggested, that the problem is perhaps that there are not enough investment opportunities that are being created by women.
So those are big questions, but I mean, I would like to say that over the past couple days I've been at another conference which was largely development organizations and governments investing, talking about economic empowerment. And a couple terms that have been used there that I have not been used very much here at all. The issue of empowerment, women's empowerment, the word gender. We talk a lot about women here, but the topic of in addition to the financial impact on women and the financial impact on private companies or banks, what is the social impact? And that hard to quantify oftentimes, but I feel just as important topic. So while I think that there is a lot of data, and we've shared a lot of data today, studies here by people who have been presenting, I think it doesn't tell the whole story. And that the way I think businesses should make money, that's their job, to make money for their investors. I think if they looked at this data with an eye towards making money and used it consistently, they would see a clearer line and then maybe perhaps believe it more. But I also do believe that your hypothesis, I'm sorry not to prove you wrong, but there is not as much investment. We've made the case, people have seen the data. I think if they use the data, there would be more investment, but at this time, they are still, I don't know why, I'm not a business person, but they're not willing to take that risk, both to engage in a market that they might not be as sure of, they might think it's more not as stable, but also this other impact of empowerment and what that could, I would make the case that empowerment would further increase their profits and increase the market. But I think there are many issues at play that haven't been directly addressed here that I hope we can get to today.
Okay, so we'll get back to you on that. I want to just turn to Ritva as well and get your perspective on this original question. and what Susan is suggesting is, do we not yet, as an investing community, believe the story, or do we think there's too much risk in it, that we're not investing in it? Or is it, and/or, more a question of supply, and there's just not enough investment opportunity? And can we get your thoughts on that?
Thank you, it's a great pleasure to be here. I come from a development bank perspective, and that's obviously the lens that I look at this, and I talk about gender financing here, and that's what, when we have looked at it from both IFC's point of view over the decades, as well as now at Finnfund, which is a Finnish development bank, the question is very much to us that we don't see it is easy to find those opportunities that are what we call impact investing, which means there is obviously, clearly it is an investment which is viable, sustainable, which provides the financial returns, but it also has that social angle that is very strong, and it has to be there. And when you look at what the development banks normally, obviously, they are in the forefront of developing these kind of sectors where there is a strong social angle, and then trying to mobilize the private sector later, and obviously in direct discussions with the governments, trying to bring in the regulation at the same time, etc. But at the moment, I don't believe that there are enough opportunities. I don't think that this industry, gender financing has reached the mainstream. I don't think there is enough awareness of that. We don't see it even playing a significant explicit role in many development bank owned strategies. Within the World Bank Group, within IFC, we've had it for a long time. We obviously have it in Nordic countries where I come from. It is part of the Finnish, development policy. The government explicitly says so, which then goes and flows into the strategies of development finance banks, but also very much into the private sector investment, be they pension funds and other institutional investors. So that, I think, is a clear issue. But it's not only the not having it as part of the strategies. It's also the question that there are a number of barriers, which are, we talked a lot today, and we've all heard a lot about the technology and how much that can bring access. But there are, as we know it in the emerging markets, there are huge legal barriers for women, and they go, into not owning property, not having inheritance rights, not having in general legal rights. You can't have collateral, so how can you have access to finance to start with? That's a very clear one. Clearly there are about 200 million less mobile phones in emerging markets, so the numbers are staggering. So we talked all the day about how much we can bring the women in through the mobile technology, but the fact is it's a huge barrier as well. There is about 800 illiterate people, 2/3 of them in the emerging markets are women. So there's so many barriers that are other than they certainly are not technology or technical driven, but much broader, much larger, and they need to be tackled for this industry to get to the next stage.
And I would also say cultural barriers. There are people around the world, men and women, who fundamentally don't believe women should control the money that comes into a household. And so those power issues have to be addressed at some level.
Not only control the money, but be out there in the market,
Yes.
setting up businesses, having business relationships, etc.
Yes.
But then you agree to me after all. I mean, if women aren't allowed to handle money, they can't found their own business. Therefore, investors can't invest into their business. So the pool into which you can invest is a lot smaller because of these barriers.
Let's ask an investor. Ise Bosch and Dreilinden looks to invest in gender supportive or gender diverse organizations. What has been your experience, Ise, since you've created Dreilinden and been making investments?
Yeah.
Are there enough opportunities out there?
Opportunities have not been the problem if you speak broadly about gender. We're a relatively small private fund that's in the human rights field. We invest 40 million euro. Of this is 17% only in impact investing. Microfinance is an obvious and easy choice, and yes, there are opportunities, and there's the real question why there's not more of us who are in this. And I do think that foundations, private investors bring a particular strength to the field, in that they tend to be very long-term. They're not dependent on election cycles or changing regulation like that. And as independent, they represent themselves, right? They can add what they know from their grant-making side into the field of impact investing. Why are there not more of us? I think that's a good question. It's a valuable question given what we know. And actually, I want to go back to this morning when there was talk about the emotional distance. And I do think we have that on the investor side. The women and money doesn't carry warmth in the, let's say, northern world or the world of investors. Even women and investment doesn't pull heartstrings. Finance and women has not really warmed up so much either. I think we'll have to go for a while. These are cultural issues, indeed. I mean, in this country, it was through the 60s that women, if they were married, had to ask the husband for certain issues around money. So I guess I'm a pretty rare animal in terms of being an impact investor and relatively cutting edge in this. There could be more. One hindrance is definitely regulation. Like in this country, once the chancellor had discovered microfinance, regulation made it impossible to have public funds very soon after that in microfinance. There would have been a chance. To come closer, I think, what foundations are increasing to do around the world is match mission with their investing. And that'll bring the issues that we have here to them, but not necessarily under the term of women or even under the term gender. Those tend to be social change foundations. It'll have to be worded in that, and that case will have to be made, as opposed to the business case. The business case might be secondary to these investors.
To impact investors, you mean?
That's right. Economic empowerment is needed for social change, right? In that order. So it'll be around human rights. It'll be around social change where gender plays a role. I think this is where it'll go more mainstream for private investors.
Eva, did you want to respond to that?
I would like to react, and please don't be angry with me, because in Germany, in panel discussions, you really have discussions,
okay.
And not everybody.
Keep that in mind.
I remember now those times 20 years back on microfinance. Why was it so important for us to say it's a business case? Because we knew there were so many people out there in the world waiting for the finance. And we knew that never ever enough money would be around from such change investors. Only if you lever that money and get investors who are not pure impact investors in. And if you take the cause of women, them being a good investment, and now I know I'm contradicting myself because I said before the pool isn't big enough, but just imagine we managed to grow it very big. You need to get private money, investment money.
I don't think there's a contradiction here. Sorry not to fight with you.
They're both German.
It's sustainability. We need the business case for sustainability in order to catalyze social change.
My reaction, to your comment was, do you think that social impact is more acceptable than saying pure gender lens investment or investing in women? Do you think it has to be couched under a broader social impact human rights lens in order to gain more converts or more investors?
Sorry to say yes. I'm afraid, see, that emotional distance that was spoken of this morning, I do think it's very deep-seated. And, you know, I come from the women's funding world, the women's donors world. I'm at home here. There are very few people who feel independent in the money they have who are in this world. They will not make that change. So that's why we're talking about money. That's why in my field, we're not talking about LGBT, lesbian, gay, bi, transgender people. We're talking about sexual orientation and gender identity. We are looking at the mainstreaming side of it, and this is what will get us there. Yeah.
I actually think it, in my experience, holds us back a little bit. The whole concept of women as a social issue, because I have, in my experience, actually seen institutions that were founded by women, grew on the basis of serving women, and then commercialized. Because they've been so successful, now they've commercialized, and there was a very prevalent strain of thinking that says, now that we're commercial and oriented at making money, we can't be so focused on the social issue of women. It almost was like, this is unprofessional. When all along it'd been a financial issue. I mean, a social issue as well, but all along they've been making money on this. So it was, maybe somebody could advise me on a better response in the future than, what? And then I also want to say, if I may answer my own question about our experience as an investor. You know, I don't have trouble. I invest in microfinance or inclusive finance, which has traditionally been about women. So, and particularly within the Women's World Banking Network, there are very many institutions that are very committed to women and very gender diverse. So it has been less the problem of finding the opportunities, but then once I have invested, partly on that, because of that strain of thinking I just described, keeping them gender focused and gender invested as they grow and commercialize. And one of the best tools I have as an investor to influence that agenda, our agenda, is to show them their own data. And to say, if you gender disaggregate your own data, inevitably you will find that your percentage women in your non-performing portfolio is significantly lower than your percentage women overall. And sadly, I'm also finding fairly consistently that your percentage women new clients are lower than your percentage women male clients. So even though your women clients are doing better, you're reaching out more to male clients. Now, in microfinance, are we having the same problem that even at the micro-entrepreneurial level, there are not enough opportunities being developed? And why not? Or is it more of this bias that, you know, it's not a financial decision, and if you want to make the financial decision, you have to go for a more male-oriented culture. And Susan, you're very focused on data and giving the investment community data. Talk to me about how you see what data is missing, how USAID wants to collect data and disseminate it to make the case for either financial or social, or what's more important.
Right. Well, we are very focused on collecting data. We actually already do through every program that USAID does around the world, we collect data. The problem that we have is bringing it all together from over 150 countries into a way that makes it available to the public, the US taxpayers, of course, but also the people in the countries where we are doing work, putting it in a format that they can access it, and also other governments, and putting it in a format that's comparable. But we are finding that the more we use data to influence our programs and that we share with our beneficiaries, whether they're public, private, or individual citizens, that they will respond to it if we can be disciplined about using them in an ongoing manner. Not just looking at them once and saying, yes, you've convinced me, because then we find they kind of slide back into it. So whether it's investing in women as clients, making sure the workplace is appropriate for women and engaging more women into the formal workforce, or making products and services for women specifically. In all of these that we found, it's beneficial for the private companies involved. It often does have a social impact, that what we are trying to do at USAID, but that, and the long term is making it sustainable. And so making all three cases, I think the hardest part is that it takes time. That investing in women, both having the financial rewards and the social impact, is not a 2-year project. That is a 3-year, and especially if we bring in the cultural change, right? That's 5, 10 long years that you need to continue down the path. You can look at the investments. You have the data yourself, you were saying, but you have to make that in the long run. We have a new program in Asia, Gender Lens Impact, where we're specifically working with countries, governments, and private industry in those countries to look across the whole realm. So it's looking at the women as workers, women as an investment, and women entrepreneurs. And we're going to do more specifically in those countries to helpfully do a pilot project to then expand to the rest of the world. It just launched at the beginning of this year. And so we're just starting, but just having the conversations in our countries like Cambodia and Thailand and Vietnam about what the potential was, just asking the questions started a lot of conversations.
I agree. Just asking the question already can be very powerful. How do you intend to use that data to advocate, to advocate change or advocate behavior? And who's your audience for that data? Who does it go to?
So we go to the 3 groups that we've been discussing a lot. We bring it to governments, we bring it to the private sector, and we bring it to civil society. Because what we found is that if we can build those partnerships, that it's more effective and more sustainable over the long run. But the key is then building something that all 3 feel that they're benefiting equally and creating a long-term partnership that they can move forward together.
I'm going to ask Ise, in usage of data, how do you use data, first of all, to inform where you're going to direct your investment, but then also as an investor to influence your investees?
Okay, let's talk about small data.
Okay.
Yes, I have an advisory council who would propose investments, and we do a due diligence about that. Standard procedure, probably understood here. In terms of evaluation, we had to be more creative and we do look at our 7 impact investments very individually, and we see ourselves as conversation starters very often, as was said. We have something like 20 questions where we would address gender issues on fund level and on company level. We include questions around what empowerment measures are happening at each of these levels, and things like women's representation at different levels in management. And already there were the funds that we invest in that creates interesting discussions, because very often if their impact if their gender criteria in place for the companies, they're not necessarily for the fund itself. So we can stress that, and we ask about non-discrimination measures taking place. And this we can actually do around LGBT, lesbian, bisexual, gay, and transgender issues also. So this is really beginning work, and I'm mentioning it here because, as it was said just before lunch, we do look for what's not here in the picture. And also it was mentioned that disaggregated data is extremely important on the individual level. Women's turning out to be not one thing, right? And if we want to really find the potential, it'll be in a more diverse, more fluid, more developing kind of look. And I guess it's the kind of impetus that starters of enterprises can bring, like Women's World Banking has brought to women versus men. And it is something that also maintains long-term interest of knowledge. Really, in the end, I find out I want to learn about the issue of gender. I don't think we've understood gender yet. And for this purpose here, it's perfectly fine to count women versus men. But there'll be other issues about this population that we want to know. Yeah?
Interesting. Please comment, and then I have a question for you.
Okay, I just wanted to continue on the measurement of that gender, when we talk about gender financing and that social impact that you were talking about, the microfinance and the questionnaire. And to me, it's so important that those tools are developed across the board that will show what the benefits are, of that social impact, because many of these impact investors will say, well, I need the returns and I'm not necessarily willing to sacrifice the returns, or maybe a little. It depends on the type of motivation of the investor. However, they all need quantifiable, clear evidence as to why are they doing specifically women-focused financing, and what has been that impact. And I don't think we have those tools today. I mean, it's apples and oranges and the fruit salad and everything else at the moment. And it does not help to me, in my view, to bring the investors in to the field. It is slowing down the development of bringing the institutional investors in particular.
Because we don't have consistent measures.
Exactly. Which can show that, why they are doing, women, specifically women-oriented investments. Yeah.
Does the panel agree with that we don't have sufficient consistent measures of impact around gender?
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree, particularly in the financial world, because there might be trade-offs as well between things which an institution does on the social side, like education of women or their children, and all that costs money, and because of that the financial performance might be lower. So to credibly signal this is an institution which might have a financial return which is a bit lower, but can show for all these social achievements, would be, I think, a very good thing. What I don't consider right is if you make a big list of all the social things you did and at the same time don't show that your customers pay incredibly high interest rates or something like that. So I think we need standards there. And please let me add, I'm full of admiration that you sort of start things to standardize, ask questions which others probably would not ask, and therefore sort of move the frontier of reporting.
But I wonder if we're confusing even what we're thinking about here a little bit, because if we're saying, I mean, on the one hand, women, gender diverse organizations, that's all we said, is organizations, whatever they may be, that have more women in management and more women on the board do better. So there's not a question of a social trade-off, apparently, if the data is true. They do better. Now, if we're trying to impact women and address things, barriers to women, now that might be a different question, and that, which is, it's looking at it from a different perspective. Now I've developed a business that's trying to address an issue that's holding women back. That might, and maybe there's technical assistance and things like that, and that might have a lower return. But it also segues into the question I wanted to ask Ritva. Okay, so if we're gender lens investors who are just looking at financial return, or not just looking, but let's say we believe that if we're investing in institutions that are managed and governed by women or gender diverse, we'll do better. But there's not enough opportunities because there's not that many of such organizations available to invest in. And Ritva, you've enumerated some of the things, and Susan as well, some of the barriers that are keeping those companies from being out there, these investment opportunities being out there. Should impact investors then be looking more at investing in things that might address the barriers, like education, like the legal barriers, so that the investors are themselves helping to increase the pool? Or are we going to then face the problem of there's no return there?
Well,
does impact investing have a role to play in breaking down the barriers?
To me, it does, very much. I look at it very much from the point of view of saying we need to build. I'm not looking at that institutional or investors would be only looking at organizations. They need to be looking at these women who are out there and those women are in emerging markets, and they need to be helped, and they need to be financed, they need to have that access to finance, and that's the whole pool, and we need to build that capacity so that then we have the raw material, to be able to structure them into products that for instance, larger institutional investors can invest in, because they may not have that hands-on experience in these countries. So for instance, what to me is obvious that microfinance is a good example, which started from the sort of grassroots level, building the kind of volume and the kind of scale, and then you can bring in larger investors, and you can bring more institutional investors. Looking at it now in the context of the for instance, development finance. You go in and you're trying to link in as many local players as you can. You need to build their capacity, be they the local or international big companies. We talked about Unilever and others today, but there are plenty of organizations there which could be financing women focused sectors. Looking at, for instance, what I have seen in forest sector, you have a lot of outgrower programs. Those are women that are handling that, or agri programs, or we heard about food as a sector. That's one example. You have a lot of local banks there which are not focused on gender financing per se. They don't really have that lens. They don't have that capacity or the understanding. So when you're trying to build that capacity, and that is where you bring the replicability in, and you can put the scale in, and then you can bring in, for instance, through development finance banks, you can help them to bring and finance part of it and structure it so that then it does share the risk. And then you can bring in private sector investors into those women-led, women-focused structures. But you need that layering. You need the layering of the risk and the sharing of the risk, and that raw material from those women before I think this is sort of enough scalable to a larger extent.
And is the role of taking on that risk and that intermediary, maybe too much risk from a purely financial perspective or a risk-return trade-off, is that the role of, who's that the role of? Is that the role of DFIs? Is it the role of impact investors? Is it the role of governments?
Well, I certainly believe that everything that needs to be done has to be done and run and structured as a private sector investment. It has to meet all those market tests. It has to be on returns point of view, but it has that strong social angle. So I don't think that government, to me, has a role in itself to play in that investment side. They have a very strong play to make sure that the regulatory and the legal environment is in place and it allows this kind of investment activity. And that's a big task, and we are not clearly there. But I think when you go to actually investment and the sharing of the risk, that to me is the question of bringing in, the DFIs clearly are an obvious one, but they should also look at it and saying, they cannot be there on other terms than other investors, but they can obviously provide that additional comfort, and they can actually bring in other private sector investors as catalysts, which is what we often do. And they also link, like the USA is often there, and there may be the technical component to bring in assistance and technical assistance, etc., to the whole package. But it has to be a market-driven, market-priced, and everyone on the same terms. That's how I think it is doable, and it can expand into scalable.
So I understand we don't have any questions from the audience. So either we've not been very engaging or we're answering all your questions. So I hope it's the latter. But until we get an audience question, I'll keep asking. what I wanted to ask the panel as well, think about, and we talked a lot about earlier in the week, who is the first mover, who has the responsibility? Is it legal regulatory? Is it the civil society? Is it private sector? And I also want to point out what was interesting in our own fund raising is most of the money globally that is supporting the Women's World Bank and Capital Partners Fund comes from Europe. In a lot of European countries, there are regulatory mandated percentages that have to go to impact investing. So, coincidence? I don't know. But how do we feel about actually mandating a certain amount of private capital to go to impact investing? Eva?
I mean, actually, I don't like it too much, because particularly for women, we are worth something. We are good investment. We don't need these type of regulations, I would say. But at the same time, I would say, yeah, government should be the first mover, but perhaps in different areas. It really shocks me if I hear how many women in the world haven't got legal identification. I think that's terrible. And I think government should see that not all women, but also all women, meaning all people, have legal identification to get equal opportunities.
So you're saying the government should be involved more in that type of work than actually requiring a certain amount of investment, private sector capital?
Start earlier, giving the same opportunities to women than to men, and that's something to start with, but also in education and so on. I think that's of utmost importance to make this pool just as big as women, the number of women in the whole population.
So how do you feel as an investor? Do you want to be told to invest a certain amount?
I would love to tell the others, yes, to also do it. No question about it. And I do think it would unleash a lot. If mission investing for non-for-profit entities of whatever sort was mandated for a part of it, just because it would elevate that term. It is not well known, and we go through many institutions in between the investor and the product very often. And because of perception of risk, very often impact investing or anything that's perceived as more risky kind of drops down the back. Now, in terms of first mover, I don't think without incentives something will work. And that certainly is true for government, and we heard some ideas yesterday at the G7 conference, how you can incentivize a ministry. If you raise a budget, if they meet gender goals. We happen to have this chancellor who, even though she's conservative, has discovered this topic for herself. I'm very happy this is happening here, and it's, we're moving someplace, and we did not move very much for a long time. So yes, these incentives do play a role, and they can be creative. They can actually be fun to bring them in, and there's plenty potential for more. There's plenty leeway up the top of what more we can do, certainly in the foundation world, but for private investors in general, I would assume with the development banks also.
Susan, as a non-European representative, a non-European government, what do you think?
Well, I would say that although the U.S. government does not provide incentives, and I don't see that in our near future, that what we use the U.S. government as one of the largest procurement mechanisms across the world. The amount of money we spend on goods and services, and we do have at the in the national level within the U.S. where we look out to minority and women-owned businesses for a large amount of funds. And what USAID is looking to do more of that in the countries where we're investing. So we're looking for those firms across a spectrum of investments, whether it's women-owned or others, local investment, that we can give through our procurement mechanisms, partnering with the private sector to help these industries.
Yeah. And Ritva, maybe you can just sum it up. I'm supposed to cut us off. I'll let you talk.
Well, I've already said, very much coming from the Nordics, it's obvious to me that I do believe that the governments can certainly influence this. They can put it as part of their development policy, which they have in our case and in Sweden, etc. I think that will then channel through the development banks, which then can bring in the private sector. I don't believe that we should be looking at sort of instructing or guiding or ordering the private sector investors. It is up to them. I would think in today's world, investors will have to make up their mind as to what their strategies and what their goals are in investment, and I would expect that any responsible investor would look at the world and say money is not all.
Well, I want to thank you so much for your perspectives. I mean, I think to use an investor's phrase, the best thing we could do for ourselves is to develop a track record. And a track record of successful investing both on financial and social returns when we invest with a gender lens. And I really want to thank all my panelists, Eva, Ise, Susan, and Ritva, for your thought-provoking comments and your support and concern about this topic. And let's get out there and do more of it.
Thank you.